These are the most disturbing crimes that happen in the 4chan community, and as the video goes on, each one will just progressively get worse. On March 11, 2025, an unknown user published a post on 4chan containing a disturbing threat against Jewish people. I'm an anti-Semite and I'm going to take as many of you with me as I can before I check myself out of this earth. Now, despite the severity of this message, the post initially went largely unnoticed. But the following day, on March 12, other 4chan users who saw the post reported it to the authorities. The FBI was notified and swiftly contacted the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's Southern Nevada Counterterrorism Section. And from there, the investigators traced the IP address of the post to a home in Henderson, Nevada. The person behind the threat was then identified as a 38-year-old man named Michael Tomasino. The same day, police went to Michael's residence, and upon arriving at his house and questioning him, he quickly admitted to making the post and confirmed that he regularly shared anti-Semitic content online. And after this confession, the police proceeded to put him in handcuffs and took him into custody. You see, this wasn't just hateful speech. The post explicitly threatened mass violence, which elevated it into a criminal threat under the law. And shortly after being apprehended, Michael appeared in the courtroom, standing in front of a pro tem judge, a temporary judge assigned to handle cases when the regular judge was unavailable. His bail was set at $20,000. And just 2 weeks later, on March 27th, during a grand jury return hearing, Clark County District Court Chief Judge Jerry Weiss decided to raise bail to $50,000 due to the explicit threat of mass violence made in Michael's post. Now, while it remains unclear whether Michael was sentenced, he remained in custody as the case moved forward. But unlike Michael, who got caught almost immediately, this next case involves a person who preyed on innocent women for years.
If you've ever had a fear of being stalked on the internet, that fear can become a reality at any time to anyone.
In 2012, an ambitious 24-year-old Madison Conradis was just starting a new marketing job in Florida. But then, as she was scrolling through her phone, she saw something that made her freeze. Explicit photos of herself without any clothing had been posted online for strangers to see. And when she traced where they come from, she realized it all began on 4chan. Even worse, she couldn't figure out who the person behind the post was, as the site enabled its users to remain completely anonymous. She was even more horrified when she realized that these pictures were from behind the scenes of a boudoir photo shoot, meant to be a private and intimate set of photos she'd taken in college and never intended to be posted publicly. At first, Madison suspected the photos had been taken from a private online gallery her photographer once used, similar to a portfolio site where clients could view their images. But when she took a closer look at the original 4chan post, she made another disturbing discovery. Alongside the photos, her full name and contact information had been shared, with users openly encouraging others to harass her. Overwhelmed and unsure how far the images had spread, Madison decided to reach out to her friends and colleagues, trying to find out who else had seen the pictures. But not long after she started her investigation, a man contacted her via Facebook under an account named Joe Bummer. He demanded new explicit photos of her, threatening that if she didn't comply, he would forward the already leaked photos to her friends and family. Madison didn't know how to respond at first. She thought that this could be simply someone who had seen her photos online and believed he could blackmail her into sending him more. So she decided to ignore the messages. But sometime later, someone sent the pictures in her father's Instagram DMs, and even her marketing clients informed her about having seen some of it as well. Now, Madison realized she couldn't do much to stop the images from circulating, so she tried to keep living her life as normally as she could. Later that year, while she was at a friend's party, Madison got a panicked call from the manager of a hotel restaurant where she'd worked at in the past, informing her that the photos had made their way into his inbox. Now, 2 long years would pass, and in 2014, her state enacted a new law against cyber harassment, giving Madison hope that the relentless harassment might finally be treated as a crime. So she went to a local Melbourne police station and reported everything that had been happening to her. Unfortunately, she was told by one of the officers that the life-ruining situation she'd been enduring couldn't be treated as a crime. The police explained that for someone to be charged under Florida's cyber harassment and cyber stalking laws, investigators must show that the same person repeatedly and maliciously targeted her with messages or threats over time, which can be difficult to prove when anonymous users are involved, and that without a clear suspect or digital trail, there was no valid case to pursue. This left Madison unable to do anything, as what was being done to her continued to intensify. And when she couldn't take it anymore, she asked her twin sister Christine for help. Christine had just passed her bar exam and was interested in environmental law, but even she didn't know much about how online crimes were handled. But Christine still tried to help. She spent hours digging through Florida law, police guidelines, and similar cases online, trying to figure out what could actually be done. But the more she looked into it, the clearer it became why nothing had moved forward. Even though the law now made it illegal to post explicit images without consent, it still required investigators to identify who originally uploaded the photos and prove intent. In Madison's case, the images had spread through anonymous accounts, reposts, and message boards like 4chan, with no clear trail back to a single person. Without a name, an IP address, or someone directly tied to the uploads, there was no one for police to charge. And without repeated direct threats from the same identifiable person, the harassment didn't meet the threshold needed to move forward as a criminal case. Now, Madison became more and more embarrassed when meeting new people, knowing that just by searching her name online, they would see her leaked photos. However, that would soon change. 2 years later, in 2016, Madison met Jeffrey Geiger, a man from the company she worked for. They began to develop romantic feelings over time, and eventually the two of them started dating. Since they lived in different cities, Madison and Jeffrey traveled to see each other whenever they could. And on November 24th, 2016, Thanksgiving Day, they even took a vacation to a couple of islands in the state called Florida Keys. During their trip, Madison tried to clear her head from everything that had been happening. She deactivated most of her social media accounts and stayed offline, hoping for a break from the constant stream of reposts and anonymous comments that still followed her. But while she and Jeffrey were sitting on a beachfront watching the sunset, she decided to log back in briefly and shared a photo to her Snapchat story for her friends to see. Now when Madison opened her phone the following morning, the sense of relief disappeared almost instantly when she'd received a Facebook message from one of the anonymous accounts that had been harassing her for years. "You guys having a great time in the Keys, I see." Now because of this, she actually knew that he must have been able to view her Snapchat story, so Madison quickly took a screenshot of her Snapchat friends that had seen it. There were 39 names in total, and as she scrolled through them, one stood out. At the very bottom of the list, Christopher Buono-Core, a man she knew from college, who had never been a regular viewer of her stories and wasn't part of her usual circle. Now in 2017, a year later, Madison and Jeffrey's relationship would start to fall apart for unknown reasons. And as if that wasn't enough, she discovered more explicit images of herself circulating online, once again appearing on 4chan, and this time it wasn't just hers. Explicit photos of Christine that she took for her husband were also being posted along with inappropriate pictures of Madison that had been privately captured with Jeffrey. And as Madison and Christine tried to understand how these images kept resurfacing, their attention slowly narrowed to the person who had known about the photos long before they ever appeared online. And one of those people was Jeffrey, because during their relationship, Jeffrey was actually fully aware of what Madison was dealing with, including the fact that her private photos had already been leaked, and that the harassment tied to them had continued for years. Now at one point when Madison was trying to organize her modeling work and figure out exactly what images existed and where they were stored, Jeffrey had helped her digitize and upload some of those photos into a private Dropbox account so they could be all kept in one place. Now at the time it didn't seem unusual, but when the next wave of explicit images appeared online the same year, Madison noticed that some of them looked identical to the files she believed had only existed inside the Dropbox. On top of that, the anonymous accounts posting them appeared to know details about her life that had never been public, and by then Madison and Jeffrey were no longer on speaking terms, so Christine reached out to him instead. When Christine confronted Jeffrey, she didn't accuse him of uploading the images. Instead, she asked him how one of the anonymous accounts involved in the harassment seemed to know so much, and this is when Jeffrey admitted that he'd been in contact with one of the dummy accounts that had been tormenting Madison online. And from there, Jeffrey also confessed that he'd reached out on his own, pretending to be someone else, claiming that he was trying to gain the harasser's trust. He believed that the person behind the account was based in New York, and that by communicating with him directly, he might be able to gather information that could eventually be used against him. But he actually denied posting the images himself, or asking for new ones. But he acknowledged that he had willingly engaged with someone who'd been targeting Madison for years. Now as soon as Christine told Madison about this, she ended any contact they had had whatsoever. Now some time would pass during the later months of 2017, and as Jeffrey was preparing to leave the city, he left behind a handwritten note. In it, Jeffrey apologized and asked for forgiveness, not for leaking the images, but for involving himself at all. But instead of giving it to Madison, he handed it to Christine, as she was the one who'd contacted him, and he knew that Madison would no longer listen to any explanation. The message reads, "I'm an idiot and don't deserve your sister. I'm not asking you to forget or look past what I did. I'm just hoping that one day you'll forgive me. I swear on everyone I love that I was only trying to help." A few days later, the twin sisters then filed a report on Jeffrey to a local police department of his town in Lewiston, Maine. Now they didn't do this because they could prove that he'd uploaded the images, but because his prior access to the files and his undisclosed communication with the harasser raised concerns that they needed to be formally documented. Surprisingly, the assistant district attorney, Lisa Bogue, decided not to prosecute him, reasoning that although the whole harassment situation was serious, Jeffrey had actually not acted with any malicious intent. And Lisa specified that the report said Jeffrey had actually emailed Madison, explaining that his goal had been to contact the original harasser, who was reportedly in New York. This convinced Lisa that Jeffrey never intended to hurt the twins, and the decision left the sisters in a difficult position. With no charges moving forward, there was little law enforcement could actually do to help them contain what had already spread online. The photos continued circulating, passed between anonymous users, and without clear proof of who was responsible for posting them, there was no one the police could actually hold accountable. Now over time, Madison and Christine began looking for other ways to regain some control, and it's unclear whether Lisa or any other attorney stepped in at the stage, but eventually they were able to file a copyright takedown request tied to a portion of the images. That process took time, and when it did work, it only led to some of the photos being removed from 4chan. But in September of 2018, Madison and Christine decided to take legal action again. They filed a lawsuit against Jeffrey and the perpetrator responsible for the 4chan leak under the name John Doe, accusing them of invasion of privacy and emotional trauma. And using the lawsuit as leverage, Madison and Christine were able to legally demand records from 4chan and other internet service providers to uncover the suspect's contact information. But even as the court handled the legal side, Madison and Christine continued their own investigation on their own terms. Now as they dug deeper, it became clear that the same anonymous user was also posting images of at least 4 other women. And so from there, the twins began tracking the perpetrator across different online spaces. They searched for usernames he may have used on the messaging app Kick, which he also appeared to use on 4chan, while soliciting images from multiple victims. On top of that, they examined subtle but consistent writing habits, like excessive ellipses and long paragraphs that never ended with periods. And when Madison and Christine searched the other women on Facebook, they noticed something unsettling. Each profile shared one mutual friend in common, the same name that appeared at the very end of the list of people who viewed Madison's Snapchat story, Christopher Buono-Core. Madison knew him as an unpleasant man from Long Island, college. He attended the same Florida Institute of Technology with Christine and was a member of the same fraternity as Christine's husband, Dana Messier. And as if things couldn't get any more eerie, Madison also remembered that years earlier, when she was playing softball at the nearby Brevard Community College, Christopher had been there in the stands, sitting with Christine and Dana, quietly watching the game. Now coming to a realization that the unknown stalker was indeed connected to them at some point of their lives, Madison also uncovered something even worse. On the day of Christine and Dana's wedding in March of 2017, Chris was actually there and attended the ceremony. And while Madison didn't have any sort of interaction with him at Christine's wedding, he was there watching while leaking Madison and Christine's explicit images on 4chan boards. And with his identity no longer in question, the twins began taking larger steps to hold Christopher accountable. In spring of 2019, Christine contacted Christopher's ex-girlfriend, who we'll refer to as Jade, a girl who'd actually been enduring his inappropriate advances and harassment. It turned out that Jade had actually filed a police report back in 2016 after discovering that the explicit photos she'd taken privately for a weight loss program had been posted on 4chan without her consent. The images had been stored on her personal laptop, and while the report acknowledged the post, it never confirmed whether the person responsible was ever identified. Now, as Christine dug deeper, she learned that Jade was not the only one. Another victim whose images had been posted on 4chan was a relative of Christopher's, who we'll call Jacqueline, who was only at the time. Court records would also say that Christopher uploaded photos of her in her school uniform to 4chan, shared her personal information, and openly asked users for advice on how to manipulate her into sending suggestive images, while also expressing violent fantasies about her. Now, it doesn't stop there. There was another victim, one who was Christopher's childhood friend from New York, who we'll refer to as Dizzy. Although she was an adult by the time she discovered the post, the images he spread was from when she was only Along with the photo, Christopher had shared her personal information online, and after strangers began circulating it, Lizzie started receiving threatening messages and phone calls from people who claimed to know where she lived, making her fear she was being stalked. Now, by late 2016, the writing style in the post became unmistakable to Lizzie, and when she confronted Christopher, he actually confessed. His family, through her brother, assured her that they would step in, and on that basis, she chose to not involve law enforcement. And years later, she would pass along his confession and their messages to Christine. Now, after Lizzie came forward, another name emerged, and this time the connection to Christopher was far more personal. The fourth woman, who we'll call Eliza, was his ex-fiancée. They had been engaged while living in New York, and after their relationship ended, Christopher began posting intimate images of her on 4chan, along with her personal information again. Now, Eliza only learned about this later, after Christine had tracked her down on Facebook and warned her about what was happening. Now, by that time, Christine had reached out to all four women the same way, by tracing shared details in the post and contacting them directly through Facebook. And with multiple women now identified and lied back to Christopher, Madison and Christine turned to law enforcement, this time focusing on the jurisdiction where Christopher had been living when the images were being uploaded, Suffolk County, New York. They hoped that the growing pattern would finally be enough to trigger action, but instead they ran into hesitation. Officers told them that they were unsure whether Christopher's behavior met the legal threshold for a crime, even though the posts and messages just kept piling up. From here, the department issued a public response through spokesperson Dawn Shaw. She said that the offenders who shared intimate images without consent caused widespread and lasting trauma, and emphasized that the Suffolk County Police Department treated these cases seriously while balancing the rights of the victims. But Dawn also said that because the women at the center of the complaint did not live in Suffolk County, she'd been advised to contact the police department where she'd resided, since that agency would have proper jurisdiction to open an investigation. But that position didn't actually hold for long. In 2019, Christine was actually told the opposite by a Suffolk County officer. This time she was told that the county would have jurisdiction as long as the images that had been uploaded on the internet were uploaded from within Suffolk County. It directly contradicted what she'd been told before. Each explanation pointed somewhere else, and none of them actually led to an investigation, even as Christopher continued targeting them online. Now, Christine continued reaching out, but the responses became harder to deal with. In one exchange, she was even told that she never should have allowed the photos to be taken in the first place. Now, at that point, she stopped waiting for law enforcement to make sense of it. Christine began assembling her own case. She created a 59-page document that laid out the full timeline, including the messages and images, and tied each action to the specific laws that applied to the states where the victims lived. Christine gathered everything she could against Christopher. She printed screenshots, saved message logs, and organized records showing when the posts appeared and who they targeted. And once the material was complete, she shared it with the other women, and together they brought the documents to their local law enforcement offices and asked for an investigation. Now, by July of 2019, federal authorities had taken over criminal sides of the case. The harassment crossed state lines and involved multiple victims, which placed it outside the scope of any single local department. Now, separate from that, Madison and Christine continued pursuing a civil case on their own. While the criminal investigation focused on charges and potential prison time, the civil case was used to uncover who was actually behind the anonymous posts. And finally, through court filings and records obtained during the lawsuit, the activity was traced back to one person. In April of 2020, the sisters actually formally identified Christopher as the individual responsible, but Christopher actually never responded to the civil case. When he later filed for bankruptcy, it became clear that the lawsuit would not result in any financial compensation either. Instead, the judge ordered him to remove the images and destroy any copies he still possessed. Now, as the civil case stalled, the criminal case moved forward though. By the end of 2020, federal prosecutors charged Christopher with 6 counts of cyber stalking, and in January of the following year, he pleaded guilty to all 6 charges. Now, even then, the outcome felt uncertain. Madison said that she worried that the sentencing would be light, and after years of being ignored or dismissed, the sisters feared that the case still might not end without any real consequences. In November of 2021, Madison stood in a Tampa courtroom and addressed the judge directly. She described what it was like to have private images shared thousands of times, and to live knowing that strangers were circulating pieces of her life without consent. She also explained that the damages didn't end when the post stopped, and that the harm followed her long after. Now Christopher asked the court to consider his guilty plea, his lack of prior convictions, and what he described as the need for mental health treatment. He requested a reduced sentence, but much to Christopher's shock, the judge rejected that request. He was sentenced to 15 years of federal prison, a term nearly 4 years longer than any prosecutor had sought. But unlike Christopher, who terrorized his victims through screens for years, this next perpetrator would bring his violence into the real world in a matter of hours while taunting authorities online.
Edmund Burke School. From the same angle, you see the tunnel in between buildings and the alley where a gunman unloaded a firestorm of bullets Friday.
It's April 22nd, 2022. Washington, D.C. police burst into a 5th-floor apartment building in search of a man who'd shot 4 people at random. However, once they arrive in the man's room, they're met with a disturbing sight. The suspect is already on the floor, dead. Officers secured the room and paused, before someone finally called in the coroner. And when they finally did find out the truth, it was something none of them expected. But to understand what happened, we need to rewind to the night before. Shortly before midnight on April 21st, an unknown man took a rideshare from Fairfax County to the Van Ness residence. At 12:43 a.m., he was captured on a lobby surveillance camera, entering the Van Ness building pushing a suitcase. To anyone passing through the lobby that night, he looked like any other resident returning home. But within hours, everything would change. The next day at 3:18 p.m., an off-duty Metropolitan Police Department officer named Peterson, who was working part-time at the Edmund Burke School, voiced this over the radio.
Shots fired.
From an upper floor of the apartment building, a gunman opened fire towards the school using a rifle mounted on a tripod. He fired over 200 rounds, some traveling more than half a mile from the building. In the Cleveland Park neighborhood, bullets struck 2 businesses and punched through several parked cars. 4 people were hit as the gunfire swept across the area. A student was struck while crossing an elevated bridge near the pickup zone, and a part-time employee was shot on campus. 2 others were hit inside their cars outside the school as bullets tore through their vehicles. Now the students, along with faculty and staff, rushed to take shelter, and the police department received 33 separate 911 calls about a shooting in the area, but didn't have an exact location of the perpetrator. Witnesses reported smoke coming from a residential unit window in the AVA building, and within minutes, police began sweeping the school while federal agents rushed to the scene. Now after authorities had narrowed down the shooter's location and secured the immediate area, the residents of the AVA building were evacuated floor by floor. An hour later, at 5:28 p.m., authorities established a family reunification center, a secure location set up immediately after the crisis where families could safely reconnect. Now meanwhile, authorities received multiple tips about who the shooter might be, and users on 4chan began sending screenshots of a thread titled
"School shooting."
The thread was on Paul, a politics board known for extremist and hateful content. Now from there, the account behind the post, using the name Raymond Spencer, posted a flag-style map of Washington, D.C., along with a link labeled as a license. That link led to a Wikipedia page titled
"Do what the you want" to public license.
Beneath it, he continued posting messages to the thread writing,
"Dear God, please forgive me."
Seeing how absurd the thread title was, the commenters didn't know how to react. Maybe this was just some sick jokes of a post, and the poster was just trying to get attention. But that quickly changed when Raymond said another message, saying,
"They're in the wrong part of the building right now, searching XD."
Now at the time, there was no way to know whether the name attached to the account had any connection to what was actually happening in person. But as soon as users started to connect the dots on what was going on at Edmund Burke School and what the poster's messages were implying, they understood that Raymond was a shooter himself. And soon, anonymous users started verbally attacking him, saying,
"Eternal hellfire awaits, you piece of shit. You should have shot yourself first."
Another one began to panic, commenting,
"What the actual why the
Despite the outrage in the thread, Raymond posted a message one last time, saying,
"Waiting for police to catch up with me."
Now anonymous users had already begun forwarding screenshots of the thread to law enforcement, giving police a name to match against billing records. And during the immediate investigation, police cross-referenced the screenshots with billing records and confirmed that Raymond Spencer was indeed the leaseholder. And so at 7:30 p.m, his name was announced to the public. As officers evacuated nearby civilians and secured the perimeter, they eventually found an opportunity to close in on Raymond. And so at 8:36 p.m, units attempted to enter Raymond's room, which was barricaded with a refrigerator. Now 10 minutes later, they were able to breach the door, but before they could get inside, they heard a gunshot. By the time the door was successfully breached, Raymond had already unalived himself. Now officers found more than a dozen firearms, including several rifles, arranged in a sniper-type setup with a tripod mount. Large rounds of ammunition were also scattered across the room. Fortunately, all 4 victims were eventually treated at a local hospital and were able to recover. And aside from his activity on his post on 4chan, police found no clear motive even after days of investigation. But unlike him, who targeted strangers from a distance, this next case involves someone who turned on the person closest to him, driven by an obsession with the very content that flooded 4chan's darkest corners.
And he had lured his stepmom outside of her farmhouse, claimed that there was a cat injured, and from there he would go on to murder his stepmom with an axe.
It was 2013. Reuben Braithwaite was 12, living a quiet life on Broadmoor Farm near Lawn, Wales. His father Charles worked as a landscape gardener, and his stepmother Fiona Scorfield treated him like her own child. Fiona's mother, who we'll call Jasmine, also lived on the farm, and the four shared a quiet, routine life together. Both parents and Jasmine helped Reuben with his studies every night, talked about which universities he might attend, and made sure he had everything he needed to succeed. Everything was really going well, until 5 years later. In 2018, Reuben, who was now 17 years old, began frequently visiting 4chan out of curiosity, and over time he became fascinated with posts about mass murders, attempts of leaving this earth, beheadings, and spent a lot of time browsing these materials. And eventually he dove deeper into threads filled with gore-filled images. He began downloading and saving this material to his phone, repeatedly watching videos of road accidents and mutilated bodies, becoming increasingly fixated on what he was seeing, to the point of wanting to see what it was really like. On the afternoon of March 6, 2018, an ordinary Tuesday, Fiona and Jasmine were just going about their daily routine of tending the animals at their farmhouse. Reuben had returned home from school and joined them shortly after. The three sat together inside the cabin and talked over tea, unaware that this would be the last time they would all be in the same room together. Several minutes later, Fiona and Jasmine went inside the house, while Reuben stayed outside to take care of the chickens and other animals. And not long after, Reuben tapped on the living room window and called Fiona outside, telling her that there was an injured cat nearby. Fiona loved animals, and without hesitation, she stepped out to help. Reuben then led Fiona away from the house and toward a more secluded part of the property. Fiona, of course, followed without hesitation, and when they reached the spot Reuben had pointed her to, there was no injured cat waiting there. Instead, Reuben reached for an axe he'd taken earlier from the workshop. He raised it and struck Fiona over the head with the blunt end, causing her to collapse to the ground. Desensitized by his obsession with gore on 4chan stalker threats, he struck her 6 more times, leaving her defenseless on the ground. He then cut her with a samurai sword, which he took from underneath Charles's bed. And as Fiona lay dying, Reuben then stood over her and used his phone to record the scene, watching as she bled out on the ground. At 5:47 p.m, Reuben called the police on himself, saying,
"I've just killed someone at home."
When authorities arrived at the farm, they were met with a horrifying scene. Reuben was standing on the farm track with his hands raised when officers pulled in, and nearby, Fiona was found slumped against the front door of the house, her body covered in blood, while a short-handled axe was recovered from the doorway of an outbuilding on the property. Police arrested Reuben immediately and took him into custody, and once he was questioned, he told officers that he wanted to knock Fiona out before using the sword because he wanted to murder her without her resisting. And even more disturbingly, he added,
"I just wanted her dead so I could have a life. I'm just fed up."
During the investigation, police confirmed that Reuben had attempted to upload the footage he recorded to 4chan, but the uploads actually failed because his account had already been banned. When they examined his phone, they found the same kinds of violent videos he'd been collecting for months, including footage of extreme violence and beheadings. Now, at the sentence hearing, prosecutors revealed that Reuben had confessed to planning the murder the night before it happened, and he told investigators that he'd armed himself with both the axe and the sword the next morning, then deliberately lured Fiona outside the cabin under false pretenses. He also admitted that he'd considered leaving this earth on his own, but said he could not bring himself to do. Instead, he believed that killing someone else might offer a way out of the thoughts that he'd been consumed by, thoughts he'd immersed himself in through constant exposure to extreme gore. In a letter written to the judge, Reuben acknowledged the contradiction at the center of the case. He wrote that he'd known Fiona since childhood and that he'd enjoyed spending school holidays on the farm with her. He admitted that if he'd gone to Charles and Fiona to help with what he was struggling with, he would have received support, but he chose not to tell them about the mental state he'd been isolating himself while his obsession escalated. Now, during the sentencing, the judge also addressed the impact on Reuben's family, particularly his father, saying,
"I've received a letter from him, which I've read with care. I'm acutely aware of the appalling position in which he finds himself, as somebody who lost the woman he loved as a result of the actions of the son whom he continues to love, and indeed support. He's entitled to both sympathy and to admiration in equal measure. You are very fortunate to have his continued support as your father."
But despite that, Reuben was sentenced to life in prison. He will serve at least 15 years before being considered for release by the parole board, and if released, he'll remain on lifelong supervision and can be sent back to prison at any time. This next case, however, is someone so deprived that he brought his twisted crimes for many people to witness.
33-year-old David Kallark uploaded photos of the naked and presumed dead body of Amber Lynn Copland.
It was 2:56 p.m. on November 4th, 2014. Users from around the world were browsing 4chan, casually engaging with the kind of explicit, shock-based threads that had become routine on the random board, which was a section of the site known for minimal moderation and graphic content, when a post suddenly popped up from an anonymous user. Its caption read,
"Turns out it's way harder to strangle someone to death than it looks on the movies. She fought so damn hard."
Alongside the message, multiple images of deceased people were attached. Now, within minutes, this post was flooded with comments asking the OP what he meant by this, and the anonymous poster would then follow up by saying,
"Check the news report Orchard, Washington in a few hours. Her son will be home from school soon. He'll find her, then call the cops. I just wanted to share the pictures before they find me. I bought a BB gun, it looks realistic enough. When they come, I'll pull it and I'll be unalived by a cop." With
such an alarming reply, the thread quickly drew even more attention. But considering the fact that this claim was posted on a site where hoaxes and graphic trolling were common, many of the commenters assumed that the image were just low-effort posts meant to get reactions. Now, the thread stayed active for nearly 4 hours before it got taken down around 7 p.m. for unknown reasons. Now, this led most users to believe that it was indeed a made-up story all along, as they concluded concluded that it was removed probably because the poster himself deleted it, or it was taken down by a moderator for violating the site's guidelines. But little did they know that nearly 3.5 hours before the thread disappeared, the authorities in Port Orchard, Washington, received a 911 call reporting that a 33-year-old woman named Amber Copeland, who was the mother of 5, had been found dead inside her apartment. As soon as the officers arrived at the scene at approximately 3:25 p.m., they saw someone standing outside the apartment, who was later identified to be Amber's ex-husband, Paul. Now, police ensured that he was out of immediate danger and accounted for before turning their attention inside. And as the other officers moved through the apartment, they were met with a disturbing sight. The first thing they noticed was that the room was in complete disarray. Coins were scattered across the floor next to an emptied purse that seemed to belong to Amber, and even her dentures were lying nearby. And as they kept searching the room, they would also find her driver's license on her pillow with the word dead written across it. The officers would then notice a pile of blankets on the bed, and when they looked underneath, they froze. It was Amber's lifeless body, and her skin was cold to the touch, which suggested that her death wasn't actually recent. Her face was severely bruised with visible bite marks, and there were traces of blood on the wall above the bed. Profanities had been written across her body, and the marks on her neck proved that she'd been strangled. Now, as investigators continued their search of the room, they noticed some small but unsettling details. A framed photograph of Amber had been damaged, and the words "She killed me first" had been scrawled across a different picture on the wall. The window blinds had also been pulled down, and written across them were the words "Bad news," as if someone had been trying to leave a message behind. But when they took a look at the nightstand, they found out one more detail that strangely stood out. It turned out that Amber had recently undergone and the paperwork documenting the procedure had been left out in the open. Now, as the police continued processing the scene, they spoke with Amber and Paul's 13-year-old son, Josh, who was now present at the apartment. He told investigators that Amber and her current boyfriend, David Kelleck, had argued the night before the incident, providing a possible lead. Josh also told them that David was an alcoholic, and with this information, David immediately became a person of interest. Investigators then reviewed Amber's records, which combined with the argument suggested a potential motive for the crime. Now, when the investigators confirmed that Amber owned a vehicle, they discovered that her Ford Focus was missing from the area around the apartment, leaving them to believe that David had actually taken it and left the apartment with it. And so the detectives began reconstructing the hours leading up to Amber's death, keeping in mind that David Kelleck was now identified as a person of interest, relying on statements gathered at the scene. From those accounts, they learned that on the night of November 3rd, 2014, Amber and David had argued inside the apartment they shared with Josh. And as the argument escalated, Amber told David to leave, but he refused. At some point, Amber went into Josh's bedroom and asked him for a sleeping bag, making it clear that she would not be sleeping in the same bed as David, and telling him to stay on the couch instead. The argument continued after that, but eventually Josh stopped listening and went to sleep. Now, the next morning, Josh woke up around 6 to get ready for school. David, who was usually awake and preparing for work by then, was gone, and several of his belongings were also missing. Amber's bedroom door was closed, and the apartment was unusually quiet. Now, while at school, Josh began to feel sick, and so he tried to reach his mother by text, but she didn't respond, so he called Paul instead, and not long afterwards, Paul came to pick him up and brought him back to the apartment. And after lying down for a bit, showering and eating, Josh noticed that his mother's bedroom was still closed. This time though, a strong odor was coming from it, and when he opened the door, he stopped cold. Inside, he found his mother, lifeless, and of course, he immediately called 911. Now, by the time the authorities got involved, David had long since fled the apartment. At 5:33 a.m., surveillance cameras recorded him crossing the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, moving away from the area where Amber lived. And less than an hour later, at 6:20 a.m., he sent a text message to his manager saying that he'd done something terrible and that he expected to be in the news within a few hours. Now, shortly after that, he reached out to a friend, admitting that he'd messed up badly, and saying that by the end of the day, he would either be in prison or dead. And after sending this message, he powered off his phone to prevent anyone from tracking his location. Now, later that afternoon at around 1 o'clock, a surveillance camera captured David entering a Cash America pawn shop. Inside, he sold an old laptop for $125. And from there, he went to a nearby grocery store where he bought a 2-liter bottle of vodka along with a carton of orange juice from the money he'd just earned. Now, about an hour and a half after that, at approximately 2:30 p.m., he stopped at a Walmart where security footage showed him purchasing a BB gun and ammunition. Now, the gun was a realistic replica designed to resemble a Beretta-style semi-automatic handgun. David then remained in the parking lot for nearly 30 minutes. During the time, he powered his phone back on and uploaded the photographs to 4chan before shutting it off again. Now, around this same time, officers began questioning Josh, and after making the post, David began driving south until he reached Portland in Oregon by the evening, where he would then spend the next couple of hours inside a local bar, drinking among strangers who had no idea about the terrible crime this man had committed earlier the same day. Now, around 8 hours later, around midnight, David returned to the Ford Focus and drove off again. But not long after that, a police patrol vehicle spotted the car traveling through the area, and so the officers attempted to initiate a stop, activating the cruiser's light and siren. But David refused to pull over, and instead he accelerated, weaving through traffic as he fled. Now, within minutes, he vanished from the view, slipping away into the surrounding roads and darkness. But officers still continued searching the area for hours afterwards, but they were unable to actually locate him. And so more than 16 hours later, the Ford Focus was found abandoned, with no sign of David nearby. Now, the following day, just before 8:45 p.m., David actually emerged from a wooden area and approached an officer who was patrolling nearby to surrender immediately without any resistance. Officers searched the surrounding woods and found a small abandoned campsite. A box spring mattress lay on the ground with the words
Dave's Last Stand
written across the fabric in black marker. And close by, they recovered the BB gun he'd bought earlier in the day. And alongside was a handwritten note, which read,
I took Amber Coblin's life. I strangled her with my hands, then a shoelace. I had no reason other than I was drunk and she pissed me off. Running from the cops was so fun.
Now David was taken into custody unarmed, and he was later charged with first-degree murder, theft of a motor vehicle, and second-degree possession of stolen property. And as the details of the case became public, the photographs David had uploaded to 4chan began circulating online, and Amber's children were eventually exposed to those images as well, and the impact of seeing them caused lasting psychological harm. Investigators also conducted a forensic analysis on David's phone, where they discovered several photographs of Amber with timestamps that indicated they were taken between 1:07 and 1:09 a.m. on the morning of her murder. And as the case moved into the courtroom, David did not dispute that he'd killed Amber. Instead, his defense centered on his long-standing struggle with severe alcoholism. Now at trial, David claimed that he had no memory of the moments leading up to Amber's death, or much of what followed. He acknowledged that the writing found on the framed photograph, the window blinds, and Amber's body was his own handwriting. And when David was evaluated by a psychologist, he recalled sitting on a box spring mattress, drinking vodka, and ingesting between 20 and 25 trazodone pills, a prescription antidepressant that can cause extreme sedation and respiratory suppression in large doses. He said that after ingesting the pills, he lost consciousness, believing the overdose would work as an attempt to leave this earth. And when he later came to his senses, he recalled feeling surprised that he was still alive. Now, during the proceedings, the defense argued that he had a diminished capacity to think, meaning they claimed that David's mental state at the time of the killing prevented him from fully forming intent. And a psychologist expert, Dr. David Dixon, testified that David suffered from organic brain syndrome, a condition caused by long-term severe alcohol abuse that can permanently impair judgment, impulse control, and cognitive function. And because of this, the defense argued that David was incapable of premeditation and should not be convicted of first-degree murder. Instead, the defense pushed for a lesser charge, arguing that his mental state at the time of the killing prevented deliberate intent. But the jury still found him guilty on all accounts. And so on May 16, 2017, Superior Court Judge Jeanette Dalton sentenced him to 82 years in prison. And in response to the sentence, David simply said,
The only thing I can say is I am sorry, and I will never forgive myself.
But while David was only responsible for ending the life of one person, this next individual even attempted to leave this earth after committing a disturbing crime.
The best way I can explain what an orbiter is basically an obsessed simp. Guys that orbit around girls and obsess over them.
It was early 2017 in the city of Utica, New York. 18-year-old Bianca Devins was scrolling through a 4chan board known as Stalk, a section used for meetups and hookups, when she met an 18-year-old man named Rob. The two quickly hit it off and exchanged social media, shifting their conversations off of 4chan and allowing them to stay in regular contact. As they continued talking outside the site, their mutual interest developed quickly, and within a week, Bianca asked Rob to be her boyfriend. But this wasn't the first time Bianca had interacted with older men on 4chan. At the time, Bianca was dealing with ongoing personal struggles and social pressure, and she often turned to anonymous online forums where she felt more comfortable opening up. One of these boards she spent time on before meeting Rob was R9K, a forum technically intended for posts that had been copied or repeated elsewhere on the site, but known for something very different. A user named Shim, who met Bianca online a year earlier in 2016, described the board as a place dominated by isolated users who spent much of their time discussing loneliness, depression, and personal failures. The board's user base was overwhelmingly male, and because of that, female posters often drew significant attention simply by participating, and for girls like Bianca, the attention would arrive quickly, intensely, and from far older users. But the problem was that Bianca fit that environment all too well. She was young, trusting, and vulnerable, and she came across as something the platform referred to as an e-girl, a look associated with standard features, wide eyes, and an anime-inspired aesthetic. That presentation drew attention of older male users, commonly referred to on the site as orbiters. These orbiters would send girls gifts and money, and sometimes even illicit substances, often expecting attention in return, or at the very least suggestive photos. And when those expectations weren't met, the orbiters' response would quickly turn hostile, with some lashing out by doxing female users or even leaking their private images as a form of retaliation. Now, one of Bianca's online friends named Chloe would later recall how Bianca was well known for engaging with her orbiters, describing her as being,
She was too nice to ignore people like that, even too nice sometimes.
Now, by the time Bianca entered a relationship with Rob, she was doing so within the same platform where older men and orbiters lurked. And over the next 2 years, Bianca and Rob's relationship would fall into a repeating cycle. They would fight, break up, and then reconnect, often acting though as nothing had happened in between. On a number of occasions, Bianca would take drastic steps just to be with Rob. For instance, in August of 2017, Bianca suddenly ran away from home in Utica and traveled by bus to Long Island, where Rob was living at the time. The trip spanned roughly 270 miles, and after she disappeared, the only trace of where she had gone came from her phone activity, which was tracked by a private investigator her mother, Kim, had hired. Now, shortly after, Bianca's phone went silent, cutting off any direct way to reach her, and with no contact and no way to bring her home on her own, Kim decided to involve the police as well. And as authorities began actively searching for Bianca, word quickly spread through the same online spaces she frequented, and once Bianca actually realized that law enforcement was involved, she panic, and so not long after, she attempted to check herself out of this world by running into traffic. Luckily, the car heading towards her managed to stop in time, but the incident was serious enough that she was taken into custody and placed inside a mental facility in Nassau County, where she remained for 5 days. By then, Bianca's relationship with Rob had already begun taking a visible toll on her. Friends and family noticed that whenever the two were fighting or breaking up, Bianca's behavior became more erratic, and when they reconciled, she would emotionally isolate herself from the people around her. Rob, who was dealing with substance abuse and bipolar disorder during this period, appeared to mirror that instability, with the two becoming increasingly dependent on each other during moments of crisis. Now around this time, Kim and several of Bianca's friends began accusing Rob of stalking her. They claimed that he was attempting to access her social media accounts, reading private messages, and even showing up at her home without warning. And those concerned intensified after Rob suddenly appeared to have access to deeply personal chats between Bianca and her friends. But according to him, there was another explanation. He said that Bianca had willingly given him the passwords to all of her social media accounts, and that nothing he accessed had been done without her permission. Now as the year moved into December, their relationship fractured again, this time after Rob accused Bianca of talking to other men, and it got only worse from here, as Rob retaliated by sending explicit photos of himself and Bianca to his Discord friends. The images had been taken when Bianca was much younger, and were shared without her consent. At first they circulated quietly, passed between users who knew nothing about her beyond her online presence, until Bianca eventually came across them herself. Upon finding out, Bianca immediately brought the screenshots to her mother, and together they reported Rob to the police. And because of this, Rob actually began threatening to leave this earth in order to evade being handed legal consequences. And under that pressure, Bianca pulled back and stopped cooperating with the investigation, as he couldn't bear to have Rob do that to himself, leaving the case suspended without a resolution. But even with the clear manipulation that Rob was doing to Bianca, she kept running away from her family to be with her. Between August of 2017 to June of 2018, her disappearances became frequent enough that Kim filed multiple missing person reports for her. And when Kim asked Rob why Bianca kept coming back to him, he simply says,
"She was very lonely, and she didn't really have anybody at the time. I was like the only option, lesser of two evils. She could be alone or be with me."
During this period, Bianca spoke to a mental health counselor and admitted that she'd imagined climbing to the top of a parking garage and jumping. This disclosure led to her being admitted to Pinefield, a psychiatric facility in Utica, where she remained for a month. Now inside Pinefield, her days slowed into something steady. Her family visited often, bringing pizza and wings, and Bianca found herself surrounded by people who accepted her without question. It was something she told Kim she had not felt in years, saying it was the first time she truly felt like she had friends. And after Bianca was released, it didn't take long for Rob to re-enter her life, and any emotional stability she had was short-lived, and before long, Bianca left home again to be with him. And with no way to stop him on her own, her mother turned to the courts, and Bianca was placed under a persons in need of supervision order that confined her to house arrest and required her to wear an ankle monitor. However, in June of 2018, she violated that order by cutting off her ankle monitor completely and ran away again. But this escape attempt wouldn't last long, as she was quickly found by authorities and taken into custody. Now in October of 2018, she was moved to St. Anne Institute in Albany, a residential placement facility where she spent most of the year away from home. There, she connected with a counselor she trusted and began cognitive behavioral therapy aimed at addressing thoughts of checking out of this world and self-destructive behavior. And fortunately, this made a positive change to her well-being. On Mother's Day, Bianca even posted an image online, photoshopping herself into family photos and thanking Kim for being there for her.
"I've learned so much, and I appreciate you more now than I've ever have. I hope I can make you both proud of me. I'm doing my best for both of you, because I love you too."
Now a year passed, and in January 2019, Bianca finally came home and ultimately graduated from high school. Now at this time, Bianca's mental health had exponentially improved. Chloe, who was starting to notice how much Bianca had changed during their conversations, would say,
"She was on the up, she was getting better, and her life was turning around."
This was until the first months of 2019, when Bianca met a man named Brandon Clark through Instagram. He was 21 years old and lived near Syracuse, less than an hour from Utica, where Bianca lived. At first, nothing about him stood out. Brandon liked fitness, gaming, anime, and he came across as polite, attentive, and easy to talk to. However, Brandon's childhood had been anything but stable. When he was 12 years old, his father, Jason, held his mother, who we'll name Jessica, hostage at knife point for 10 hours, convinced that she'd been cheating on him. And this incident would end with Jason going to prison. And not long after, Jessica was also arrested under unrelated charges, leading to Brandon moving through the foster care system. People in his community who knew him as a child remembered someone quiet and eager to please. Joe, a childhood friend of Brandon, described him as nerdy and overly polite, but also deeply obsessive, the kind of kid who would fixate completely on whatever else caught his attention at the time. For years, he seemed normal enough though, and the two stayed close, until Joe learned that Brandon had developed an interest in a form of Japanese manga depicting smaller humans, and that he'd been texting a younger person when he himself was 16. Joe and his several friends confronted him after seeing screenshots of the messages he sent to that girl, but the response they received was something unexpected. Brandon warned them to stop asking questions, saying that they were better off not being concerned with the things he did or thought about, because they would not like what they saw. And after that, Joe never spoke to him again. Now none of this was visible to Kim when Brandon entered her daughter's life. To her, he came across as charming and respectful, and he spoke openly about his childhood and the years he spent bouncing between foster homes. Now on top of that, night, Bianca had been clear about where she stood. As she just turned 16 during this time, she didn't want a relationship with him and made it clear from the start. Now the only thing that unsettled Kim was that Brandon would sometimes refer to himself as Bianca's boyfriend, something Bianca insisted wasn't true. But when Bianca asked permission to go with Brandon to see Nicole Dollenganger, a Canadian singer, perform at Trans Pecos, a small venue in Queens, Kim agreed, as long as Brandon brought her straight home once they returned to Utica. For Bianca, it was a big moment, as it was the first concert she'd ever been allowed to attend on her own. This, however, would end in tragedy. At around 6:03 AM on July 14, 2019, a message appeared on Bianca's Discord server.
Sorry guys, you're gonna have to find somebody else to orbit.
Beneath it was a photograph, which showed a young woman with dark hair, winged eyeliner, and a black tank top, with blood covering her face. Now it took some time for the server members to make sense of what they were seeing. The photo looked unreal, like a staged frame from a low-budget horror movie, and many assumed that that was exactly what it was. Erica, one of Bianca's friends, believed it was just gore, but moments later, the entire chat started getting concerned about whether this could actually be a real image. Someone in the chat ran a reverse image search to see if the photo existed anywhere else online, and while others directly asked the poster where it came from, the reverse search turned up nothing, and before long, the poster responded himself. He said it was taken in his car, then claimed he'd been intimate with Bianca before adding a line telling people to subscribe to PewDiePie. Still in shock, Bianca's friends started digging through their old conversations with her to figure out what could have happened that night, and slowly the pieces of the puzzle came together. It turns out that prior to the concert, Bianca had informed her friends about a boy named Oipu she'd been speaking to on Discord. While she was not seeking a relationship before going off to college, she thought that he was cute and sweet and wanted to get to know him a bit better. But he was shy and a bit socially awkward, and she knew that he had never so much as been kissed, which she thought was cute. They had met online and had been speaking for about a week prior to the concert, eventually making plans to meet in person while there. Bianca was drawn to how sincere and innocent he was and wanted to be his first kiss. Now because Brandon would also be coming to the concert and because she wanted to be honest with him, she told him that she would be meeting up with someone else, someone who she was interested in, and Bianca then asked Brandon if he would be okay with that, or if it would be a better idea for her to just go by herself. Now surprisingly, Brandon seemed not to mind and even told her that he was absolutely fine with it, seeing as they weren't together. Brandon then picked up Bianca from her house, and after saying goodbye to her mom and assuring that he would bring her back safely, the two left to go to the concert. Now while on the way, Bianca was chatting with her Discord friends, both in her voice chat and text chat. She was in high spirits, excited to see one of her all-time favorite artists and talk to Oipu. As soon as they arrived at the concert, Brandon and Bianca met up with Oipu. Shockingly, Bianca held hands with him and even kissed twice in front of Brandon, which he was visibly angered by. Now Bianca was aware of it as well, but she didn't think much of it since they had already talked about what was going on. Now the day went on, with Bianca and Oipu enjoying the concert, and by that night, Bianca and Oipu went their separate ways, and Bianca left with Brandon to head back home. Now during the trip, Bianca fell asleep in the backseat of Brandon's car, and while she was still sleeping, Brandon took a photo and posted it to his Instagram story with the caption,
"Here comes hell, it's redemption, right?"
Brandon then drove to a dead-end road on Post Street, about a mile from the high school Bianca had once attended, and while she was sleeping, he got out of the car, went to the trunk, and pulled out a knife, all while filming himself on his phone. Once he got back into the car, he woke Bianca up from her sleep, asking her about what her deal was when she kissed Oipu. Bianca then apologized, saying that she didn't mean to upset him in any way, but then proceeded to make it clear that they weren't in a relationship and that she didn't see him in that way. Even more, she reminded Brandon that they'd already talked about this before and that they were never going to be together in the first place. Now fuming, Brandon then struck Bianca in the face, causing her to fall backwards. And stunned, Bianca then threatened to get out of the car immediately and walk the rest of the way home. But before she could even open the door, Brandon pulled out his knife and decided to take her life. He then turned the camera off, only to quickly start recording once more, capturing her last breath before taking pictures of her body. The picture began to circulate online, and by 7:21 AM, calls had started reaching the Utica Police Department from across the country. People around social media platforms were reporting a disturbing image circulating on Discord, naming the woman in the photo as Bianca Michelle Devitz. And around the same time, police heard from members of Brandon's own family. At his aunt's house, family members discovered a rambling handwritten note in which Brandon described plans to leave this earth. He also posted disturbing pictures and messages on his Instagram story, including an image of Bianca's bloody arm with the caption,
"I'm sorry, Bianca."
At some point during the night of the crime, Brandon then sent Jessica a message on Facebook saying,
"I'm so sorry, Mom. I love you."
At around 7:30 that morning, Brandon then placed a call to 911, and when the dispatcher answered, he told her exactly where he was, saying he was on Post Street. He then said he'd killed someone and had intended to leave this earth, added that he was an organ donor, and after a brief pause, said that he still needed to complete the leaving this earth part before ending the call. Now a few minutes later, the police arrived at the area, and as soon as they did, they saw Brandon lying on top of a green tarp, holding his phone and broadcasting live to his Instagram followers, with him visible on screen in real time. And nearby, a small fire burned where his laptop and hard drive had been destroyed, and a message spray painted onto the ground told whoever found him to never forget about it. Now as they watched, Brandon raised his knife and attacked himself. He was bleeding heavily from the wound, but realizing that he couldn't actually go through with it, he put his knife down, and after ending the live broadcast, he took a selfie, adding it to his Instagram story with the caption,
"Ashes to ashes."
Brandon then began rocking back and forth, struggling through the pain, as if the reality of what had happened was setting in all at once. Now one of the officers asked him where Bianca was, and Brandon snapped back with a curse, telling them to figure it out themselves. Now as the exchange ended, it, an officer noticed dark hair visible underneath the edge of the tarp Brandon was lying on, realizing that Bianca's body was underneath. Now Brandon actually survived his self-inflicted injuries and was taken into custody, and by the following day, the doctors determined that he was stable enough to be questioned. Now because the photograph of Bianca's body had been posted on Discord, the hashtag #RipBianca began trending on Twitter within hours, and as the widespread online reaction continued, the case itself moved forward. Brandon was scheduled to face trial in February of 2020 on a charge of second-degree murder, and he entered a plea of not guilty. His public defender, Nuke Nebush, declined to comment publicly on the case. Inside the investigation, however, authorities focused on what had been found at the scene. Police discovered knives, ropes, and several other tools, evidence that showed that the killing had been planned in advance. Investigator Peter Palladino revealed that Brandon had a plan, and that the only part he failed to carry out was leaving this earth. The case would drag on until February 10, 2020. Brandon pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, and after multiple delays, he was sentenced in March of 2021 to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. And although this case revolved around predators who ruined a young girl's life, this next one centered on a rabbit hole that left the internet questioning whether they just witnessed a confession from a serial killer.
Someone posted graphic pictures and claimed to be the killer of Shauna Maynard, a runaway found shot to death back in 1998.
It's August 21st, 2015. An anonymous user who we'll refer to as Nick posted an unnamed thread on 4chan's random board, B. His message read,
I've ended the lives of several women for pleasure. If you can guess the name, I will upload a picture. If you can guess the name of any of these women, I will upload their picture. No more than 10 names per post. Any more than that will be ignored.
He claimed he took these photos with disposable cameras, and some showed the victims before they died. But what made this post even more disturbing was when he said this.
If you guess all of the names, I will show you where I dumped a body in 1999. The first one is free, as her name is unlikely to be guessed.
While posts like this would normally be reported to authorities immediately, the reaction from 4chan users was exactly in line with their usual behavior. Hundreds of comments flooded in. Some listed random names trying to guess the victims' identities, and others refused to participate. But many didn't believe it was real at all, and thought Nick just wanted attention. And as users combed through the message, they found the two images Nick had posted. One was a graduation photograph of a woman, and next to it was an image showing her corpse, complete with a timestamp. However, as commenters tried to debunk the post by reverse searching the image to maybe find its original source, they made a disturbing discovery. No matter where they searched, these photographs had never appeared online. Then, just 7 minutes after the thread was published, Nick replied to an unknown user's comment guessing their names, saying,
Wow, off to a great start. Incredible.
The user had guessed one of the 5 names correctly, though it was never made clear which one.
Shannon, Kelly, Madison, Courtney, and Trisha.
And staying true to his word, Nick posted more images. In them, a different female is shown. When users examined the photo, they noticed that the woman's body was severely injured and even burnt. And worse, chopsticks had been inserted into her body. And when the users saw the timestamp written above the photograph, it unveiled an unsettling discovery. August 21st, 2015. The timestamp confirmed that the images were being uploaded in real time, and that Nick was photographing the disposable camera prints with his phone and posting them live. 6 minutes would pass before Nick posts 2 other photos of the same victim with the caption,
This is from before I played with her,
implying that the victim had been taken advantage of before she was killed. The images showed her body forced into a cardboard box inside what appeared to be a closet, and minutes after that, Nick made one final post, which showed a suggestive picture of the same victim before she was killed, along with a horrifying photo of her face, which was discolored due to being severely burnt. And just when Nick was getting the attention he wanted, the site staff removed the thread. Even for 4chan, a site for tolerating borderline illegal content, this crossed a line. And once the thread was removed, Nick went silent, and for a while there was no sign he would return. But the thread itself refused to die. Across the site, users archived screenshots, compared notes, and tried to piece together what this all meant. One user, who we'll call Tyler, even created a mega thread on 4chan's paranormal board, X, sharing every image from Nick's original post before it was deleted. His message read,
Ready to catch a killer? This was posted on random a few hours ago. The thread abruptly 404, but not before the original poster published a bunch of pictures.
And at the end of the post, Tyler would share another message saying,
I will post all 4 images which I saved from the thread.
It's unclear whether someone guessed the second name correctly before Nick made his post, and the full story behind this image and the victim's identity remain unknown. And while 4chan was still trying to process the whole thing, the man behind this terrifying rabbit hole returned. On September 22nd, 2015, about a month after the initial incident, Nick made another thread on the random board, with his message only containing 2 words that read,
Dying, dying.
Alongside this text was a picture showing a man with his eyes wide out, and a timestamp matching the post date. And 7 minutes later, Nick posted another photograph of the victim with a single word,
Dead.
And just 3 minutes after that, he added one final image, showing a man wearing an orange ski mask pointing a gun directly at the camera. It was Nick himself. The message attached to the photo read,
I'll be back in a month to finish our game. If it is not this exact timestamp with an updated date, it is not me.
The attention gradually shifted away from what Nick had shown and towards what it all might have meant, as 4chaners quickly realized that they may have just watched someone openly share evidence of real violence. And because no cause copies of the images could be found anywhere else online, it became clear that Nick had taken the photos himself, yet even the explanation raised questions. In the original thread, one user pointed out a problem. See, disposable cameras are not as simple as they sound. To develop the images taken by one, you need access to a professional photo lab, but developing these images in particular without attracting attention is almost impossible, since photo labs are required to alert authorities if anything suspicious appears during the processing. A Reddit user named You're Already There pointed to a specific detail in the image of the male victim, saying,
"The victim is a man with a gold chain. You can see chest hair and facial hair. These are not crime scene photos. Crime scene photos would have size markers, possibly case identifiers. The photo would have had color corrected, would have proper lighting and perspective, etc."
Then the discussion shifted to the one confirmed detail, that Nick had identified the first woman by name. Online investigators followed that lead, and what they found changed the nature of the entire case. They were able to identify the woman as Shauna Maynard, a young woman living in Las Vegas in the late 1990s. In 1999, she was murdered, shot 17 times before her body was left on the street. The brutality of the crime shocked the local community, but her killer was never identified. But when users compared the known details of Shauna Maynard's death to the images Nick had posted, a serious contradiction emerged. The photographs showed no visible gunshot wounds. If the images were genuine, they did not match the official account, and if the official statement was accurate, then the images could not be what Nick claimed them to be. And so this consistency raised even more questions than answers.
Someone posted graphic pictures and claimed to be the killer of Shauna Maynard, a runaway found shot to death back in 1998.
In September of 2015, the uncertainty reached beyond the internet. A local television outlet, Action News, contacted the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department directly and asked about the claims surrounding the photographs. The department responded by saying that the claims were not valid, and no clarification followed. But they did not explain which claim they were denying, whether it was concerning the identity of the victim or the authenticity of the images, and they declined to comment any further. And after that, the case simply went silent, and to this day, no one knows whether Nick was a killer confessing online, or a troll with access to disturbing material, or something else entirely. What remains certain is that Shauna Maynard's murder is still unsolved, and the truth behind her death has yet to surface.